Hello, everybody. Here I am with Amanda, and we're talking about the article Integrating Aboriginal Teaching and Values into the Classroom. And this relates to the uh, Ojibwe people of Canada. And Amanda and I have already said you can relate it to any students you're working with because they all bring a culture and a diversity to the classroom. And we're trying this. We are using Call Recorder to record our Skype session, and that's how we're going to present our information to you. So we hope you profit from it because we really did from the article. Amanda, do you want to say anything about your reaction for all that you know when you read this particular article?
Well, what I thought at first was going through the different areas of teaching and the implications. I really felt that it was good practice just to acknowledge those things about your students. And I was thinking also about the importance of story of a person or a group of people, and it took me back to thinking about within the Australian context, how have the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people been treated, and how have we responded to that in terms of teaching and learning in schools. And it's really been quite mixed, and I think there's often pressure to mainstream a group of people into just fitting in with everyone else and what is done from the dominant culture's perspective. And I think that's really, in a way, devaluing their story and their experiences and a lot of their culture as well. And it's not really acknowledging that sense of diversity. And the teaching principles in the article were really kind of powerful in terms of thinking about our practice as well. And for me, one part that really stood out was the idea of including elders in the conversation as well, and really incorporating a lot of the culture and experience when you're working with those students.
Yeah, as far as using the elders, I think they went even so far as to have them come into the classroom. Interesting how you talk about things because in the U.S., we have a very large Hispanic population. And that was where I worked in the inner city of Philadelphia. And we had an incident once where shopkeepers put up, if you're going to shop here, you need to speak English. The other thing that's very interesting, at least where I live in the northeast part of the United States, it's probably true other places, but because our country really started here with our original 13 colonies, we go back a couple hundred years. And the people that came to the United States, besides the Native Americans, they founded different communities within our cities. So in Philadelphia and also in Baltimore and New York, we're really a small melting pot of a lot of these different ethnicities. So it's really very interesting that you're still dealing with that today. And that primarily people have stayed, where they were and put down the roots and things like that. And it's very important, too, that people's cultures are valued. A lot of people, as you said, the main or dominant culture would like to stamp out everything else and,
Mm.
make everybody be the same. But, that's, a sad thing to do because people have that richness and that's handed down through generations, the
Mm.
traditions and the cultures. And it is very meaningful. Um, the first question that Pete and Kim posed was, do you think it's important in an online community to know that you are dealing with either Aboriginal peoples or people of different cultures? And I think we talked about this in the
Mm.
webinar.
And it was, I guess, kind of a mixed thing. If you know people's background and their experiences, it allows you to accommodate for that. But then it might change the way you approach the whole learning and teaching situation as well, which can be, I guess, both of benefit and provide something that's, I guess, different from what was planned. And maybe it's you adjusting how you would normally be to make up for that. And I don't know whether that's a bad thing. It's just kind of interesting as well. And in Australia, we actually like with universities and things like that, the enrollment process. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people do specify that that is their background when they enroll in that. So there might be some automated process where professors just, find that out as part of who are my students that I'm teaching. And from a curriculum perspective here in Australia, it's actually included as a cross curriculum priority to address aspects of the Aboriginal culture and heritage within learning and teaching as well. I think it's important to acknowledge that diversity within your classroom, and it adds real value to the situation. I think, yeah, I would want to know about my students.
And
When,
I think you have to develop a certain objectivity too. I
yeah,
think that's where the idea of professionalism comes in. And can you separate how you might feel? It's like a doctor. You may not like all people, but you have to treat them because that's what you took an oath to do. But you talk about, I think you're alluding to the gaps that the Aboriginal people are having in their achievement, and that is probably true of almost any minority. And in this particular article, they talked about um, there's like a 28-year educational gap between First Nations and regular Canadians, and um, this is mainly the people that are living on the reserves. And they said that it hasn't changed in the last 10 years. And yet, in that time, we really have research showing how we need to be more culturally sensitive. But I guess that's not, handing over into practice. And again, I think this is true of an online course, a blended course, or a face-to-face course. But it is easier with face-to-face. Being able, sometimes you can tell a little more easily people's backgrounds and things like that. Um, Now, if you know then that you do have Aboriginal students, and you said you'd want to know, and I think I like to know, um, students' backgrounds, and I think too, if you're attuned to dealing with this diversity, you want to know because you can tap into those resources. Like you talked about having the elders involved in, the planning of the programs and running things past them and having them even come into the schools and everything. You can use that same diversity to enrich your program, and they are getting more primary sources on information. Um, and my question was, would you, this graphic that they used, which you read through, and I did get a copy of it to put into our response, but this table of the things that they were teaching, would you, based on this article, um, and just based on what I think you already do, you incorporate the students' cultural background, their history, uh, what makes them special into your curriculum?
definitely. I think, I guess the organisers that they've got within the table, respect, love, bravery, wisdom, humility, honesty, and truth. Um, from looking at an Australian perspective, they seem really like core values to how the Aboriginal people work within their communities and within their cultural aspects as well. And I think each of those words to me speaks some sense of power about any learner in any classroom, and recognizing the diversity that brings as well. But I guess I'm kind of drawn to the idea of having students share their story and their cultural context, and really weaving that in such a way that there's an element of intercultural understanding developed through the interactions. And maybe it's a context, and looking at it from an online perspective, maybe there's a context that we can frame or provide as a teacher and part of the initial activities, but also generally throughout how the interactions within the course. And it's making me think also that being an online learner, it's similar as well because it's more of a global experience and there are many cultures that you interact with when you're looking at learning from a global perspective. And I think it's about exploring that idea of richness, but also valuing the diversity of experiences, cultures, and also opinions. And rather than people thinking, here's the right idea and here's the wrong idea, it's more, here's the spectrum of possibilities, of experiences, of ideas, of learning, of opinions. And that can really, really enrich the learning and teaching process.
And you're making me think that it comes back to the teacher. As we were talking, sometimes you can have preconceived notions, because you do know this and you say, well, you generalize, or it may affect different things. But I think one of the highest implications in student achievement for any student is teacher expectations. And that's even more critical when you're dealing with children of a minority culture or, and I mean minority more in numbers. That's what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, just the numbers. And I think those teacher expectations really lend to, as you said, identifying with the student's culture, valuing the student's culture, viewing it as a culture that has something to give, and
Yeah.
then you use that into your curriculum. For whatever it is that you're trying to teach, you can bring that in. And I think I was impressed that they did use values to drive their learning and their content. It
Mm.
wasn't just about learning, 3 times 3. It was more that, you would learn the wisdom to know what you don't know. And I really was drawn to the definition of humility, where they talked about that humility reminds us to reach out to others for assistance. And I think as we talk about connectedness and teachers becoming more connected with one another, I don't think we do that easily at all.
Mm.
So
And I
I
think,
really thought that was of great value.
and as teachers, the assumption is that we're experts in knowledge and in learning as well. And so to admit that we don't know something is, uh, in some ways, for some people, it's such a risk to their identity to admit that we're fallible, and we don't know everything in some kind of way. But to me, being humble is about showing that you don't know everything and that you can adapt and respond, and it's okay to ask for help when you need it. And I think that's really powerful thing to model for other learners. And I'm just thinking about from a diverse cultural perspective as well. It comes back to being really empathetic and understanding the individuals and the groups within your classroom as well, and modeling that to students. And sometimes when you have multiple cultures together that perhaps have conflicts in their past, or maybe some of the students have been brought up to view a culture in a certain way that is not favorable at all, it's about modeling that empathy and stepping in and saying, well, when you treat that person like that from their perspective, how would that feel? What is that situation like to them? Can you be in their place? And really kind of flipping the idea around so that they can broaden their perspectives.
I think modeling for students is so key. They are watching what you do. And when
Mm-hmm.
something happens in the classroom, whatever it is you're responding to, they're going to respond the same way. It's just like your children. They see whether you're patient, whether you're kind. The expression, child learns what they live with. Well, children learn what they're taught with too. And, that's very true. Is there anything you would like to say as we sum up? Because if we go on for too much longer, nobody's going to want to watch it or be interested. Although I love listening to you.
Oh,
Is there anything that we didn't touch on? Um,
I think we were very broad, and I guess the questions to me were kind of trying to get us to focus in on our classrooms and our students and the people we work with. And I guess we're both in a place that we don't necessarily have a specific group of students to work with. So I'm happy to discuss it at that broader level.
well, uh, the I think that's where you start with it. And
Mm,
I think that's what we were acknowledging in the webinar. This was a discussion of the diversity. And then where do you take it? So then you take it into whatever you're going to do from here on out. You do put it into the planning. And I think basically we agreed that you would incorporate these 7 living principles into the curriculum that you're doing, that it is important to do that. And how you would do it depends on the group that
the
you're
context,
working
yeah.
with, but the fact that you do it is the same. And I think just learning about the Ojibwe people was really very interesting to me.
Mm,
And, I value the culture, and, I'm sure this comes out of Pete's work, I would think, and makes me want to know more about that, and I'd like to hear more about that. So I think this is a topic that is especially relevant if we're talking about, flattening the classroom and taking down the walls. You have to equip students with the tools to be able to relate to people that are like themselves and that are not like themselves. So I
definitely.
think I think it's the most valuable lesson that we can learn, because
Mhm.
if we can't learn that, we have the state of the world that we see today. The intolerance, and I think kids can identify with that too. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that's always been interesting to me is to get them to talk about the complex problems that they see in our society and how they would deal with them. And a lot of it is related, I think, to intolerance,
Oh,
misunderstanding, and years of um, people believing something about other people that
that
is
isn't
not true.
necessarily
Yeah,
true. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
And
And
then until you have experience or then meet somebody, that's how that changes. So it's providing those kinds of experiences that hopefully, um, can change the climate, at least the um, collegial climate in the world of how we're getting along.
yeah, and I think there's really, from a curriculum in schools perspective, there's a focus on learning content and learning processes, and really, it's broader than that. Learning is about how to be and how to interact with others as well. So it's about who am I, how do I fit into the world, and what is the world like? How do I deal with that? And I think acknowledging cultural diversity and differences in people is such an important aspect of that.
It is. And I would say, too, that to me, the focus of education and the reason we learn is to become better people. So if it's not helping us do that, then it's not worth it.
Hmm.
However smart you are or how many standardized tests you could pass, if you're not able to relate to other people, appreciate other people, respect other people, follow all these 7 values, then you haven't learned a thing. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Amanda. I'm going to turn the recorder off right now.